this free private view event that's been convened by Cara Newman, one of the MA Curating and Collections students who has worked on this exhibition, Jocelyn Herbert and Tony Harrison from the Jocelyn Herbert Archive at the National Theatre. We're very lucky today to have a few distinguished guests here. Our speakers today, who Cara will talk about in more detail, Jenny West and Trish Montemuro, and we're so grateful for you coming today to speak with us. Erin from the National Theatre Archive has, some of you have been working with her, and we're eternally grateful again for all of your support to make this event happen. We also have David Gossard here, who worked with Jocelyn Herbert a lot and has supported us. So thank you for coming. And Sandra Lusada, whose photograph is here in other parts of the room. It's really fantastic to have you here again, Sandra. So thank you very much indeed. So I'll hand you over to Cara Newman, who's chairing the proceedings today.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Jenny and Trish for coming. Just to give you a quick bit of background on both Jenny and Trish. Jenny is an artist, and her work has covered sculpture.
Can you talk a bit louder?
Yeah, sure. Jenny is an artist, and whose work has covered both theatre and sculpture, and was also Jocelyn Herbert's design assistant and mask maker on the Oresteia. And Trish Montemuro was, in 1982, joined the National Theatre as company and senior stage manager, working on over 50 productions, and worked as production and company manager on the Trappers of Oxyrhynchus, was assistant director to Tony Harrison on Square Round, and production coordinator on The Labourers of Heracles. So thank you both for coming in, and we hope you can help us shine a bit more light onto the collaboration with Jocelyn Herbert and Tony Harrison. So I thought Jenny has kindly brought in a few objects from her own personal archive. So maybe, Jenny, you would like to begin by just taking us through what you brought in today.
Well, I brought some masks that we made for the Oresteia, and they're masks you can handle, as opposed to all the very specialised that you can't. And I'll just start off, I'll just very briefly tell you what's there, because I think I'll be asked questions later. So this is Orestes. This is the first phase when you make a mask in muslin in a negative mould. And I had one of these in my side. I wouldn't cut it because it's interesting for students to see. It's been wrapped a bit with shellac. So that is Orestes. I designed that one. Jocelyn designed this one. This is Clytemnestra. And this is very strongly influenced by Iberian sculpture, because she loved early Iberian sculpture. This, interestingly enough, if you've managed to see the exhibition, this is an early Fury mask. And as you know, the Fury masks, if you've seen them, have got that red string hair, bright red lips. But this was an early Fury mask, and I'll talk a bit more about the fact there's no ball. This is a facsimile of the real male chorus mask. And these delightful little beards were made separately, and all the masks are made of muslin, so that we actually made little plaster, little clay models of beards with a negative mould and pressed the muslin in and added it, so it had this little 3D effect. This is Apollo with this movable mask. This is made by Jocelyn. This is the old nurse. Very small head. Every head was every actor had a plaster mold made of his face and then a clay mold, so that the masks just fitted their own faces. This is one of the female chorus. And finally, I thought it would be interesting to you, this is one version of the old map that she decided to disregard. So I'll explain about why she did it afterwards. And it's interesting to see this African mask in relation to this. Sorry, we won't see it very clearly, because she was also very influenced by African masks. African heads, not necessarily masks. This beautiful object, I expect you'll realise what it is. It's a sapphire from the Trappers of Oxyrhynchus. It's one of the shadow puppets, and it's a piece I chose because I could choose something from the archive, because I like the fact that I could put it in all sorts of lovely, lively profiles. It just misses its phallus, which is meant to be tall and springy. I don't know why it doesn't have it, but I can make another one. Here I have two photographs. These are from, this is actually the Sunday Times, I thought I'd seen the whole newspaper, when the play first came out. And Greg Hilty was Orestes, and there were two photographs of him. And he really knew how to use masks. So many actors didn't. And this is my sister Sandra's photograph of Jocelyn wearing this mask in front of a very sad painting she painted when George Levine died. And she also had an absolutely supernatural understanding of how to wear masks. I'll talk about how to wear masks later a little bit. And I just put this man picture in of a comic mask character, the Greek statue, because it's so opposite. These are tragic masks, and this is a comic mask. So, and this is a lovely drawing of hers, which is Agamemnon, and this is a wash drawing of the idea for one of the female chorus. And the last thing is another photograph by my sister of Jocelyn sewing the piano wire around the edge of the mask in order to give it flexibility, and also, let me see if I can show you. Right around the edge we had to sew piano wire, which gave it flexibility and made it keep its shape. So that's the sum total of objects that you can look at, and please be told about, because she would have liked that.
Thank you, Jenny, for bringing this in. As you just introduced them, maybe we could actually go straight into talking a little bit about the masks, as you just presented them. So one question I had in particular was both Tony and Jocelyn seem to obtain a profound understanding of the use of the tragic mask from the Oresteia. And as you were last on that, I was just wondering if you could maybe talk to us a bit more about what it was about the use of the mask within production that made the storytelling process so important.
The mask allows the individual human characteristics to be laid to rest, and therefore allows the essence of what's being said to become absolutely important. And when people wear masks, I don't know if you've ever seen actors wearing masks, particularly if they know how to use them, there is this total suspension of disbelief. Once someone is in a mask, you know it's authentic, you know it's the character that they are portraying. I know that many actors didn't like putting on masks because they wanted their faces to be seen. They were, as Greg Hilty was the actor who I recently did a big workshop with at the Almeida. He was Orestes, and I hadn't seen him since when we did this Oresteia. But he said that he used to go into some sort of trance, and he had to be quiet, and he had to get into the mask, and he loved the way that in a way he disappeared, and he just could be the character. He said, although he really denied it in the end, he said, I wish I could always act with a mask, because it means that I give up my pride and my ego. He said, I don't know if I quite mean it, but that's what I experienced and I enjoyed. And some actors actually, having been asked to act in the Oresteia, couldn't bear wearing masks, and they said, we don't want to be here anymore. But quite frankly, if you'd seen the production, which most of you are too young to have seen, you would have noticed very clearly when he was amongst any of the chorus, that when he was there, you really only watched him, and you hardly watched the chorus, because they didn't know how to move. And the reason they didn't know how to move was not really their fault. It was that Peter Hall did not want to employ someone who was a knowledgeable mask expert. Because you cannot act naturally once you have a mask on. Your body movements are exaggerated by the fact that your face is still, but at the same time can convey emotion. So tragic masks can convey both sorrow and joy, simply by how they're used, and also in conjunction to the body. So the body, the angle of the head, or the movement of the body, all bring into play this very extreme explanation of what the character is feeling. But, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Unless you understand that, and unless you understand that whatever you're saying must be conveyed by a movement of the head, the audience, all they see is an actor here speaking their lines, and you can see the mask shaking, and they might look around this way, but it's just sort of shaking. It's not doing anything. So I'm particularly wanting to say this because it was, in a way, a wasted opportunity, I thought, and wrong of Peter Hall not to explain to the actors how powerful the mask could be. There are lots of people who do know how to use masks properly. So, also, one of the reasons, sorry, because I probably got sidetracked, Tony and Jocelyn were so excited by masks, was that great suffering could be conveyed through the mask, and the audience could suffer it. It wasn't the mask acted as a vehicle to convey what was happening, at the same time to distill it in a way. So the audience could see anything and could be involved in the emotion, but at the same time, the mask allowed them to cope with it. So I think if you've ever seen any shows with masks, one can be completely, especially Greek tragedies, one can get so involved in the fact that the mother has been killed or the father's having his eyes gouged out. Although you don't see these things, you read them, and you read them through the way the actors are conveying these terrifying emotions, decisions, contradictions that the actors themselves have to cope with within the drama. Have I answered it? Yeah, at all?
I was just wondering, when you look at the characteristics of the mask, they're all very different. Where do you begin with working out the characteristic of what that mask should be?
Well, for Orestes, he take his character, he was faced with an impossible dilemma, but he was, in essence, a pure man. And I think that Jocelyn used to do drawings, and then I would try to interpret them. And either they worked or they didn't. And so with every character, Clytemnestra was a strong woman. So I think it's just the artist's, by doing research, of course, it's the artist's ability to think laterally and be able to try out and translate, that finds a form that makes sense. So drawings would come first, and making in clay would come second. And then finally, of course, once they're made, how they're painted. Well, they were painted very simply, as you know. When it comes to the Furies, that was extremely difficult. Because Tony wanted all sorts of blood and furious faces, that's what she started with. But being Jocelyn, when she didn't agree with anything, she would always do exactly what the director wanted, whether it was to do with sets or objects, artifacts. She would then slide in on the side and say, well, you could look at this idea. And in the end, I don't think they ever disagreed with her. They always chose exactly what she wanted. But she found, first of all, as I know you probably will have read in that book, Jocelyn Herbert, if you've read it, looked at it, she writes about it. At first, when they had a very gory mask, all the actors were too animal-like. Then she did things like this, more helmet-like, more enclosed, a bit more Nazi. And she felt it was too abstract. They couldn't find a way. So in the end, she decided to do these rather beautiful and strange heads, which in one way at first are rather frightening because of the way they move, and then they become more the kindly ones in the play, with their red lips and their red string hair, and they change because the actor changes the mask. The old man, she very much looked at African masks, African heads. She simplified and simplified. As you know, she liked simplification. She always thought that paring down, whether it was sets or costumes or anything, paring down spoke much more than exaggeration. I think she was very good at character things. The dear little nurse, it's a sweet little face, anxious, a different sort of character. And of course, she had a certain amount of humour. I think she was extremely good. Can you see that? She was extremely good at experimenting with form. When you say how did she begin, it's a really difficult question because artists begin and they look at things and they try things out. And that was what was such fun working with her. She also gave one the opportunity to try things out oneself. Is that correct?
I really like, I just picked up on the word essence, that you used a couple of times there, and it's been used in a few of the objects that we picked from the archive, in particular in the room behind us. There is a letter from Peter Whitegold to Jocelyn, and he's talking about the chorus for the Oresteia and the essence of the chorus in general. And in many of the productions, they did have the chorus in the labels of Heracles and the chorus. And I was wondering if maybe you would like to talk about the essence of the chorus and why that was so important in their productions.
Well, I mean, I can say about the labor airplanes because we had a chorus of cement mixers. They were our chorus. So that's how important it was to Tony to actually, have a chorus because we couldn't afford people. We had to have, and so what happened was they became a percussive element in the play. And so that was a really interesting way of solving that problem of only having enough money for 5 or 6 actors. I can't remember how many it was at the time. But yes, Jenny, you can probably talk more about that process in terms of
about chorus. Well, when you say, if you're talking about the Aura style, the chorus was essential.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of the chorus being one and representative of one, and then how gesture comes into that, and the importance of what the essence of the gesture is, and why, how the chorus becomes so important and so integral to
I also think in plays like Square Round, the Morning Woman chorus, that was a really important thing, and they were unified in their what they did in terms of their physical movements, but they were so strong an influence, and the things they sang and the things they said, the poetry came across in a way that, Tony, that's how he wanted to convey it, and he had to have a chorus in everything that we did together. I know that. So it's about conveying the poetry as well.
I think they were witnesses. They needed to be witnesses to the events. And sometimes to elaborate on the events or speak about events that you couldn't actually see on stage. And they acted as everyman in a way, all men, the population around the event of the kingdom, and yes, they're bystanders, but they're not. And we're all bystanders to events. There's a crash on the road, and you think all the people who are standing there watching, standing back, they are a chorus in a way. So it's rather lovely. You've got the protagonists, you have the chorus, and you have the audience. So they act as a sort of halfway house.
As this exhibition is mostly to do with the collaboration between Tony Harrison and Jocelyn Herbert, I was maybe both of you could just talk about what it was about their collaboration that was so strong and what unified them so much for 20 years.
Well, I think a lot of it was to do with the text and the ideas, particularly with Tony. He would start a long time before production got underway, even before it was written, doing lots and lots of research and sending them to Jocelyn and myself. And they were just his way of really sharing his ideas, but also expanding them as well. And I think that's really important. And the other thing that was important was refuse. We went on lots of refuse places before we got to things. For instance, Travis had started with but there's many photographs of them poring over one of his notebooks on the way up the site to the old ancient stadium with his red spined blue notebook, and just poring over and looking at pictures of his drawings and his ideas. I think that captivated her and excited her as an artist. And well, it was very exciting because their way of working was very unique. They shared with everybody, and that was their philosophy. You were never too lowly not to be included in those thoughts. That's how they worked. That's how they that's how they work with people. I remember one time we were in Delphi, and this man from the crew came on his own. It was his own money. He came on holiday when we were in Delphi just to work with Jocelyn. And he said, she was so amazing because you make a little suggestion, and describe it back to you like it was your idea and elaborate it beyond all recognition, he said. But he just fell in love with her, you know, because she was so giving and so she shared so much. And I think I said that, told that anecdote at her, one of her memorial services at the Royal Court. But it was a really important part of her that all the technicians really got on with her because she shared like that. That's what she was like. It was important to her. It's a very important aspect of
Do you think that was something that was ingrained within her from her early training at the London Theatre Studio?
Yes, I think all that.
There was kind of a system where there was no one star.
No.
Everybody was very equal within the company.
She was on the building committee of the National Theatre when the building was built. But before that, you know, Brian Shaw and Sandini, Michel Sandini, and the old kid, George Clean, and students. It was set up like a laboratory, and National was open. It was supposed to be for artists and artisans, as well as, you know, designers and actors and directors, etc. And that was how the whole National was conceived. That's why the workshops were where they were in terms of in the relationship to the big rehearsal rooms, because the crew could be seen walking by with scenery. You just open the door at the back of the rehearsal room, and actors could nip out and nip into the workshop and try something on. So that was this whole premise of the National Theatre in the early days. Very exciting place to be. But you know, all institutions have changed, and I think now it has changed. But we'll see. You know, the better work. But that was certainly how it started. It was a very involving process.
She was very hands-on, it seemed, like a lot of the images, a lot of photographs we have, she's painting something or sewing something, and we're aware that there were budgetary concerns for a lot of the productions, but at the same time, do you think she kind of embraced those limitations because it kind of gave her maybe a bit more creative freedom?
I just want to say something about her and Tracy. First and foremost, it was a huge attraction for people. And I think what drew her to working with him on the Oristad was the fact, as Trish has spoken about, the fact that the language he used was the language of the people. The choruses were the way he translated the choruses, the dialogues, was in his sort of north country. Yeah. So I'm absolutely sure that everything I actually talked about, that's what she liked very much. That all the time they worked with everyone, and she certainly was someone. She was very, very diplomatic, but if by any chance someone had done a backdrop or painted something in a way she simply couldn't allow to pass, she would stay up all night doing it and then have some very diplomatic way of trying to explain it to the person. That's why she didn't really like working in film, because in film the unions are so much more powerful, and she would think with her, the first film she did, which was Tom Jones, she stepped up to do something in her fashion, and she was told she couldn't do it. Did I say anything I wanted to about that? I did have something else. I can't remember now. Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if kind of Jocelyn being so hands-on,
Did you ever see anything, Trish, any kind of, when you were on your recce's or your productions abroad, in particular, before we started to talk, you were talking about the storm that came in on the trackers of Oxyrhynchus.
Oh, yeah.
And Jocelyn having to stay up all night to fix
Well,
that.
that was to put together the shadow puppets. And a lot of her family had come. Sandra's son Sam was part of the chorus. He joined us quite late on. And then, you know, your family, Sandra's family had arrived by then, and I think they helped patch it all up the next day when it was hot. We used to rehearse 6 o'clock in the morning until 10, and then we have to have a break or siesta. It's just too hot. Anyway, then we rehearsed again in the evening where we did more rehearsals which were more to do with the text and the language and sitting down and talking through ideas. Generally, so for that day, what we had to do, because we had only, there was a performance every night, and so you had to take your play sort of in the daytime and in the evening of one day, and then the next day you'd open. So I think what happened was actually we had to wait till the show came down that evening, and we had all the other plays had a platform. They had to strike the platform, and then we set up our set, which was up. Anyway, and then through the night, this storm came up as we were working, and it got so bad, the wind was so bad, it tore the whole set to pieces. And, well, you know, the papyrus, the hanging papyrus, the shadow buttons, you know, the physical elements of the play was gone. And we thought, how are we going to get this back? But we somehow did, and it worked. And we never teched properly the burning of the screen, papyrus screen at the end of the play. We never rehearsed the setting of all the boxes with saddles coaching inside, which he ingeniously designed with, what's his name, Alistair, who was a carpenter and now owns you know, Flynn's, who does, they do, you know, folk stuff, plus they're theatrical carpenters, very good carpenter. Anyway, he designed it with her, and he made the first prototype, but she had that thing of, you know, we never got to set that where they had to all jump out at one time, which is the most wonderful spectacle to see it work on that first night. Because it, you know, could have been absolute disaster. And so yeah, we just had to go on. We did. We got there, and the next day we had to put everything together. Gradually, we got the play on, and it was fine. But
many of these productions.
One night.
I was just wondering. You know, you had a couple of the productions that were abroad were just these one-night performances.
Yeah. We believe very strongly in that. We really like that idea of just one performance. You saw it. You know, which is a great metaphor for the theatre, really. Because it's so true. You saw it.
Did you ever, at any time, think with all the hard work that went in, especially when you're repairing sets, why are we doing this just for one night? Did you think?
Yeah. Well, he wouldn't let you. He wouldn't let you. He would always be there, backing up what his idea was, and that was what was lovely about Tony, or what is lovely about Tony. He believed very strongly that he took time to convey his beliefs and his thoughts and his thought processes. You know, he was a very learned and knowledgeable man, and he shared that knowledge so eloquently with the companies and the crews that it was really exciting to be involved in. You know, you wanted to understand the process, and you saw it. You know, that idea about the light and the words coming through the mask, and the mask being something that is, it makes it easier to convey the horror of the words. You know, that was a strong thing we had.
There's a few times within their correspondence and with some other articles that other people have written, they use the term voyage of discovery when it comes to their process. So did you ever feel like when you were working with them, you were also on this voyage of discovery?
Very much so. I mean, I've got a postcard here somewhere. Just a little, he wrote, this is about to do a square round. This is about another play that we were going to do, called The Princess Play, that Richard Eyre directed later on. He was starting to sort of think about that play, but he was still working on it. And the square rounds hadn't happened. He said, so it's typed postcard. And he writes, he types it, and that means it's from Newtown. And he puts it in the top. Yes, I just had a brilliant idea to save my day. Nitrogen and oxygen equals nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas, underlined. Just what I needed. So that's the sort of thing that you get from, and endless reams of paperwork and notebooks, and he's always scribbling in these notebooks and copying them for you and sending them, and it was just that the whole process is about that.
I think all the students became very aware of that when we visited the archive. There was so much written correspondence from them.
They were so important to him, these notes. He would travel around with them. I can't remember if they were ever lost, if anywhere.
Well, I don't think so, but the other thing was the texts of things would change. I can remember doing cutting and pasting. In those days, we didn't have a computer. He used a golf ball. He used an automatic typewriter. He had to keep getting a golf ball that did Greek letters. And so I was always on the hunt for that. And anyway, then he typed these scripts up, and we go in on a Sunday and we cut and paste them to make a script up for the next day. So they come and even all have a script. It was just madness. There was no, now they have Google, wireless in the rehearsal rooms, and we used to have just loads of books because everyone had to have a reference to something, and the text. That was a really interesting thing about the text. I had endless copies of different versions of all of his plays, and sometimes I think, well, I must get rid of some of these sometime. From the very first original text that we started working on, and through all the other metamorphoses. And of course, he wrote for the space. So we did square rounds in about 4 different places. Chapters, about 4 to 7, all had to have different lines and different texts. And of course, Jocelyn designed that for that too.
As you've gone into the rehearsal space, how did that process really work? Like once you got one text and then you started rehearsal, and then what happened then? Did Tony and Jocelyn then revisit?
She would always like to be in rehearsals. She very much, she adored rehearsals, and she adored working things out. There's so much to do in square rounds. It was such a complicated and, it was just so new. Such an inventive and new type of work involving magic and science, but all the processes in that play really excited her, and that's why she solved the problem, the whole question of the nitrogen silks in a way that I think it was the time when that exhibition, Matisse exhibition was on. I can't remember where, but it was in the quite a while ago. It was Matisse and Cookhouse, I can't remember. But I remember I went with her, and but then this idea of all the silks representing different gases came to her, and of course that was the most exciting thing for her and for Tony. So huge problem with that play, and it's still in resonance. 4 years after the event, I got this little article that I found from this scientist at Oxford who wrote about it eventually in 1996, years after it happened, about all this magic and transformation and the silks, and they finally got it. He sent it to me. He said, they finally got the I just came across this in my book. 1996, Julian Beer. So finally they catch up. Why did no one write this when we did it? You know, so he was, and I really think, I was sorry about Square Round not really taking off, because I thought it was one of the most wonderful plays. But I think that Tony, one of the problems he has is that a lot of authors, including Shakespeare, they don't like to cut their plays, and sometimes they repeat things. And I have a feeling that when we went to Russia to do Square Rounds in a Russian translation, 4 years after Jocelyn died, but she was very much there with us, we managed to solve problems in the play that if only they translated it back into English and presented it then, I think it would have been a far better play. Because we did a lot of work, we solved the transformation between the, at the end of the play, leading up to China, musically, which had never been solved. And so, it was, it was quite exciting, really. Anyway,
it's interesting when you talk about the restaging of productions, though, when they go from one venue to another venue. In particular, with the Labourers and Heracles, where it started in Delphi and then it came over to the Olivier.
Yes.
And it was, they restaged it, rewrote it, and made it more relevant
absolutely.
What was happening back here in London.
That's right. Okay.
What was that process like when they decided to take that decision to?
I think it worked just because it was all about theatre and about Apollo owning the rights to theatre and music and art. And I think that Tony drew the analogy with the Fellaheen, that they were like the people sleeping under Waterloo Bridge at the time, which was called Concrete City, I think it's called. Cardboard City. Anyway, and you probably don't know anything about that. It was the most extreme. It was full of people sleeping off. And it was a spectacle that people who came to the theatre, to partake of this art, and practically walk through there on their way to the theatre. So Tony was really going to hit this hard, and he had photographs taken of Jack, who was Apollo Shepherd, and and Jocelyn redesigned, the end of the play, basically. And so lots of little phrases were added. Where the Fellaheen were, somehow taken away from art. They had this one scene where they had these little transistor radio things, or what they called ghetto blasters. It was just a sort of way of, it was very, very clever the way he adapted things in that way.
Yeah. I was wondering if we could maybe talk about Jocelyn as a kind of game changer designer, because it seems like when she first started, there were a lot of new techniques that she started to incorporate within design in terms of less is more, and things like the exposed rigging and using the architecture of the actual theatre space, and maybe we could talk about that.
Well, I can talk a little bit about that. So for her, as you probably gathered from the sort of person she was and the way she designed, she was a designer who was only interested in working, if the writer was alive, with the writer, with the director, and with the text. And so she started from there, and that's how her inspiration for, so by meeting them and talking about the play, that's how her inspiration started to take shape. And the chairs, which was the first play by UNESCO that she designed at the Royal Court. Before that, she was the stage painter at the Royal Court. The flats and the decor, she was a painter. That was a very good occasion when she used to stay all night, desperately trying to finish. But she took because she was a painter, she always said she wished she was a painter, although actually I can't really, I think she loved to have a starting point, and the starting point was someone else's works, was the play, was the text. That was what inspired her. And she used to say when she was a painter, why, I don't know what subject matter to take, or she would feel that she always fell into the same sort of dark subject matter, and she couldn't move with it. Whereas once she had a text, she could flourish in every direction. It was as though she was a spider, her tentacles went out everywhere, and I'm sure that's why she absolutely adored working with Tony, because he worked in the same sort of way. And the fact that he drew as well as wrote and looked at images all the time, because she always did that. But anyway, so she did the chairs, and it was very, very difficult, but it was a great success when she mastered it. And then the first exposure, I think, was probably the kitchen, Arnold Wesker's kitchen, where she had this wonderful idea to expose the back of the stage. It's just a brick wall, and have the lights coming down, and you can see the tracks. And kitchens aren't glamorous places often, especially in those days. And I don't quite know how that happened. I think she wanted to do away with realism in her sets. She wanted to do away with great big chunky sets. She wanted to find ways, new ways, and so she started with the bare bones of the stage. She would do huge doorways, but only using thin materials. She could evoke things without bulk, and that was.
She did that very beautifully in the Olivier Theatre. The architecture of that theatre and the way she painted the three shutters at the back, she had them painted where just a certain sort of way, but it wasn't a way, it was just beautiful. And the way she showed the whole theatre, she wasn't afraid of that, because many designers take the Olivier and they put a set into it. So they basically take the whole theatre away, put a box in it, and
good point.
she
allows the stage to be a part of the sculpture.
She did that, and of course, I know that, but I know she painted premium. She did show the court all its, open at the kitchen, certainly, and she had gauges and things like that she used. But,
part of the reason why she worked like that was kind of going back to the Greek amphitheatre and the idea of kind of like working with the architecture of the
she worked with? I mean, like, she worked with Beckett, UNESCO. I mean, these people, the word, I remember reading, I think it was that book, Beckett said she never, in his interview about it, she never liked to bang the nail on the head. Now, she talked to me about that, because I said, one of our conversations, obviously, lots of them. But, and that's how she made it. It was sort of like you wanted to get something right, because there were so few elements that if you got one wrong, it would make a big difference to the whole.
Breath is a huge influence. And the way she used to say Mother Courage. I think she used to say that was a great starting point. A way of conveying essence again. There isn't any need to. She didn't like realism. When she painted, she didn't like to come light drawing. Used to go like. She didn't really like academic drawing. If you look at her theatre drawings, they've got a lot of emotion in them. And I mean, yes, there are images.
Notebooks.
Yes. But yes, she wasn't interested in conveying things as they appear to be, like a photograph. And I'll just reiterate again, I do think it was because she was a painter, she was an artist, that she was prepared, because in painting you have to always eliminate, and the same on the stage for her.
Do you think after she read a text, a colour or a texture would be the first thing that would maybe come to her as a representative of what the text was about?
I would think that the colour would be more of an emotional colour, the shape of the stage, the darks and lights. Let's talk about that. I think rather than colours, although some plays were very coloured, as she used to say, and as I agree, an empty stage lit in certain ways was the only thing you needed. Light was so evocative. You could have a pinpoint of light, or light from one side, or above, from the back or the front. Light and sometimes gauzes. She would paint these little tiny glass, what do you call them, slides, and then they'd be projected. And it was so evocative. The brush marks being able to be seen. So, yes. If she had to choose between light, colour and form, she'd choose light.
It's interesting that you speak that, because when they then go from a stage at the Royal Hall, the National, to then an outdoor venue, then how the light then changes so dramatically.
I mean, she was always, as Jenny said, she would always go with the director, even though she might moan about the lighting, and she might have a really good idea about the lighting, that he would be. Tony wanted light, he just wanted light. He didn't care about the sort of grade of the light, the nuance of the light. He wanted light.
Do you mean he wanted light when they were outside, or always in his production?
Well, outside more. I think inside he would be, you know, there was the set elements to light and things like that, but outside was particularly, because it was often done in open air in Greek plays.
In the daytime.
In the daytime, that's right, and in light. So, and the darkness would creep in as the play wore on, maybe, and then he might. But certainly he liked to have it lit, and I think she probably would have preferred a little bit more nuance on a couple of occasions. But you know, she would never go against what the director wanted, because she was very strong about that. But she did persuade. She certainly was able to persuade in her own way.
But it must have been lovely. I never saw a production of Epidaurus or Delphi, but it must have been in the original festivals in 5th century Athens, where they had all these tragedies and comedies being played. It must have been wonderful being in that setting with the light fading and the actors who, with the use of masks, their voices would travel so far, and because they were wearing masks, their faces, because at dusk faces disappear, their masks, because they were exaggerated, would have read from. And I expect Tony, well, he did.
Look, for one of their recce's they went on, we've got quite a lot of correspondence between them in the exhibition, and when they talk about Greece in particular, there is a sentimental about the way they speak about Greece, and it seems like they both have this very spiritual connection in some way.
Well, it was a saying, we need another recce to get us out of this. I mean, it comes up in all the postcards and lots of her notebooks and things. Just a recce in Greece. That's what I need. And when she was making Prometheus, it was the Nero, and I was here, but she wrote some letters, and you know, it was nearer and nearer to Greece, and you know, the sunshine. We just had such a wonderful time in Greece. He was so knowledgeable, you know, drinking of the Piscale spring. There was all these little rituals, and everywhere you go in the country, you know, whether it was Hosses Lucas or where Oedipus killed his father, you know, these things would be pointed out, where Pegasus, you know, talked about Martelican, you know, all those kind of stories were part of it. We had this little restaurant we went to. Tony was always keen for us to understand language, so I remember the first breakdown I was writing what I thought was the word, the name of the restaurant in my little notebook. And he came over and said, what are you doing there? I said, oh, I'm nothing. I'm spelling the name of the restaurant. He said, that doesn't say restaurant, that doesn't say the name, that says menu. And so from that day onwards, menu was always, you know, we needed another reppy and a tricky menu, and whenever a menu, we're sitting in menu, looking over the olive trees, climbing up there, drinking Retsina, you know, that was Greece, and that was happiness, you know, fun, and excitement.
But I think it was also, for her, and I suppose, remember, he was a Greek scholar.
That's
so,
right.
For her, the theatre, Greek theatre, had everything that she loved. Not only loved, it was the subject matter was very profound. The way it was done was austere. There were few actors, and the setting was very, very powerful. So, and her action, obviously being with him and his knowledge, as Trish says, of ancient Greek culture in every way, but also the beauty of Parthenon, of Acropolis, of Mycenae, the link between now and the past is very powerful, and it's lovely to feel that the culture of the past is still alive and means everything to you now. I think that's linked.
We're just coming up to the end of the talk, so maybe we can open up for any questions. Anyone?
I think that's one of the most valuable discussions about theatre in a kind of in an embrace for the visual arts world that I've ever heard, and at risk of not being understood, or that kind of area where text is fundamental in the revolution in British theatre, is often at risk of being seen to be conservative. In other words, it's about theatre being literary. But of course, what it goes into, really, is not that images are just what text provides, but it's what's over and above the images that we would call poetry, which is a word that's barely used in the visual arts at all. So you're kind of going into territory that kind of is very, very valuable and partly forgotten, meaning in Italy with theatre of memory, which here was sort of studied very, very seriously at the Warburg. And it's a Shakespearean thing, really. I mean, Keats wanted only to read Shakespeare for that reason, that it's in the space of the head or of the world that's over and above what you assume it's all about. And I was just very valuable for you to talk about that, really. And the other thing is the Brechtian precedent, which is still underestimated. And of course, Brecht, correct me if I'm wrong, insisted on this concept of white light, which it's only if you had the full light would you be in a kind of working relationship as a member of the audience with what we're talking about or trying to conjure. And of course, this thing which you mustn't underestimate, which makes Trish assayed, which is the relationship between production and the apparent artist, as it were, was fundamental to the Berliner ensemble. That in rehearsals even, Brecht would be yelling at somebody in the theatre for their opinion, and they were. It's been well.
Lindsay used to do that as well.
Yeah.
Everybody in the rehearsal room was asked their opinion. And he's, of course, another.
Well, Lindsay's quote in the National Exhibition, which is something like Jocelyn's ability to touch on the poetical essence of a writer, of course, is a very visual statement.
It's also about, when you look at David's story in Beckett. Now, I think in the book, again, she says something like, that they were quite lonely, solitary people, and if you could find some kind of communication with them, it was very important. It was just a way of writing that down somewhere. Anyway, it was, yes, here it is. I'm sure David's story, she wrote this. I'm sure David's story is an completely isolated person. And in a strange way, he's near to Beckett. I suppose I find these people the ones I respond to the most, the ones who are isolated and alone, and who you have rare moments of communication. Interesting, isn't it? Something to say about it. And that sort of shows the progression between all these people.
Well, it's progression, and actually there was a lifeblood thing going on. Yeah. But the excitement of plugging into earliest drama and poetry that you still got with Beckett, who's not just a historical figure post-war who was kind of boring and didn't make many jokes or whatever it is. He was somebody carrying through that language, which is, again, over and above what you actually seem to be hearing.
But of course, all of you will be wanting to have your own writers, your own new writers that you're going to want to champion, and work with and create with. I'm sure that's going to be very important for you as well, So where do we have to stand on the shoulders of these people, don't we, and find new.
But, and you've got to grasp this point, this side, that, for example, Beckett's closest colleague at the Royal Court Theatre, apart from Jocelyn, was the lighting operator. Because without the lighting operator, he was struck, but also it was a kind of kindred spirit. There's an interview with him in Nelson's book, but it's essential. It's essential.
Yeah.
We didn't mention the word poetry, actually, and you're quite right. I'm surprised we didn't.
Well, we don't, on both sides, if you'll forgive me using this expression, both sides. Because nobody quite knows, for example, to talk about, I wouldn't, what it was like for Jocelyn to copy the Picassos, which I gather was part of her education, for Diaghilev's company. But then you see, when you jump to modern art or bring in the discussion of brush marks or what have you, and that being part of the meaning, the texture, rather than just something that I'm sure, the Picasso period was a short period. It was...
I've no idea.
We don't know. We don't know. There's a plaque on the wall now next to Covent Garden to say where it happened. But it was, sorry if I'm repeating, but it's that this education at the Slade, correct me somebody when I say the wrong thing, whereby you worked on doing up the backdrops for Diaghilev, and in this case it was Picasso, because the work was touring to London from Paris. But the education was in the craftsmanship of the job with a wonderful man called Polunin.
Yeah. We all stand on the shoulders of great, totally in some way. New forms, that's what has to happen, I think. And that's what these people must be interested in terms of your creative process.
Have you any long time. Any little thing you want to.
Okay, well, thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Trish, for
I've got a few little things here if anybody wants to look.
Is the Jocelyn Herbert